Thank you, Professor Varoufakis. I interviewed 4 years ago here in Barcelona, and I remember perfectly the headline was, the IMF is doing now, so that was 4 years ago, what I was, blamed, I was actually punished somehow by the public opinion for asking, for advising to do. So what are your feelings right now, Professor, about it? You feel vindicated? Do you feel vindicated, or do you feel, how do you feel about it?
Sad. Sad, because, look, this is not a question about me. I mean, who gives a damn about me? I'm privileged. I lead a very good life. The problem is all the people out there who are suffering needlessly. And it's very clear that the IMF has failed.
Yeah.
And it has failed spectacularly, not so much at an intellectual level. Because when I was talking to, Paul Thompson, who was the European desk representative of the IMF, and Christine Lagarde, who was the managing director of the IMF, when we were talking one-on-one, we agreed. They agreed with my analysis. But they said, oh, you know what, we have put so much political capital in the austerity program, we can't go back from it. So by the time they did their mea culpa and they changed their tune, it was too late. So timing is everything, right? Like a doctor. I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic. If the epidemiologists supporting, advising the government, come to the right conclusion 2 years after the event, hundreds of thousands of people will have died for no reason. So this is exactly what we've been having with the IMF. It's too little, too late.
Mr. Varoufakis, thanks for your book and your talk. Now thanks to Palau Macaya and La Caixa Foundation for the chance to discuss such interesting topics. I've got the impression that you feel vindicated by history now and by the very fact that the IMF and the ECB were condemning you back in 2008 are now defending the Keynesian policies you were promoting then. But still the European Union is falling short of what? The US are investing in real stimuli to reactivate their economy. The US have passed already a 3 trillion stimuli pack. Meanwhile, the European Union has not agreed not even in 1 trillion. Still, the green and environmental approach of the European stimuli gives us lots of hope we are going to the right direction. But above all, I do consider that the most important point in this European public investment agreement is that it could be the starting point for a real economic union, considering that for the first time in the European economy, we have agreed in somehow mutualizing debt. This means German, Dutch, Austrian, Danish have agreed to cover the deficit caused by the pandemic of the countries like Spain, Greece, Italy, who have most suffered the pandemic. It's not enough, we know, but it's a very good departing point for us, Greeks and Spaniards. We will keep in touch about it. Thanks, Professor Varoufakis.
Look, last March, almost a year ago, when the pandemic started, our movement DiEM25 came out, and I played a major role in that, with our blueprint. How should the European Union respond to the reinforcement of the deflationary forces which were pre-existing the pandemic and which would be turbocharged by the pandemic? And whenever, I ask myself these questions, I always take into consideration the institutional framework and the institutional capabilities and difficulties. So we don't have a federal government. If we had a federal government, it would be much easier. We don't have it. So I always try to ask myself the question, what can we do with institutions that we have and within the given treaties and rules and regulations? Because if some time ago, you've seen that probably the text circulated by 100 economists across the European Union.
Yeah, I was asking
I didn't
you
sign that.
With Mr. Piketty, right?
I didn't sign that.
Why?
Why? Because I thought it was a completely useless document. I mean, it was asking Lagarde to violate the constitution, the charter of the ECB. Why do that? I mean, it's senseless. All she has to do is say, look, I'm the employee of the ECB, I have a charter, I cannot violate. Go away. And which she did. So every answer I give to these questions is within the legal framework. So what could we have done? Let me give you an example, to cut a long story short. This is the DiEM25 three-point policy for countering the economic pandemic, March 2020. I'll just relate it to you.
Please.
Okay, 3 things that could happen quickly. You mentioned, and that's very important, speed. Speed, something that can happen today without creating new institutions and so on, that would take forever. So first thing that I would do...
Brussels, Frankfurt too is low.
Yeah, but look, but if so that's why I believe in these 3 points that I proposed, because they could have been done within 24 hours. Why? Because they don't need new institutions, not even the recovery fund. First, the European Union Council should give the green light to the European Central Bank for the European Central Bank to issue bonds, 30-year bonds, up to 1 trillion euros. The ECB can do it tomorrow. You see, the ECB cannot monetize Spain's debt. They cannot pay for your banks. They cannot pay for your government. But there's nothing stopping the ECB from issuing bonds in its own name. Why? Because it's not banned. It's not in the charter. I mean, maybe they would have banned it if they had thought of it, but they didn't. So it's not illegal. And what is the point of this money? The point of this is this. Let's have an agreement that whatever our debt is at the beginning of the pandemic, the Spanish debt, the Italian debt, the German debt, right? All the additions which are due to COVID-19 are Europeanized. They are paid for by the ECB bonds. So effectively, the ECB bond is a Eurobond, which of course is not used in order to cancel existing debt or anything like that, but it's a shock absorber so that Spain does not have to have on its weakened shoulders the additional debt due to COVID-19. Right? And by having 30-year bonds, effectively we are giving ourselves as Europeans a deadline of 30 years during which to federate. If we cannot do it in 30 years, we can never do it, and then there will be no European Union.
Okay, I agree.
Point number 1. Point number 2, I said, give 2,000 euros to every European family. Credit it. The ECB...
The states did. You know better than me, Professor. The US did so.
They did it.
They did exactly that.
They did. I mean, they did it after I said it. I said it in March, they did it in April. Yeah. Trump did it. I mean, my goodness, if Trump... I mean, the Hong Kong Central Bank did it. The Hong Kong Central Bank, the Singapore Central Bank did it. The Australian Federal Reserve Bank of Australia did it in 2009. That's why they never had a recession in 2009. So we could do it. And I even calculate how much it would be. It would be 750 billion to do it. And that would go immediately into supporting the economy, even the small shops in your area, because, you would spend the money on those small shops. Whereas Christine Lagarde is printing all this money, it's giving it to Santander, it's giving it to Deutsche Bank. They give it to the large corporations. The large corporations do not invest it. They go to the stock exchange, they buy back their own shares. It doesn't help anyone. It's wasted energy. It simply increases inequality. Right. So that's the second thing. And the third thing, investment. You want an investment program? I want an investment program. Let's create a Green New Deal program to the tune of 500 billion every year by having the European Investment Bank issue bonds worth a net issue of 500 billion euros every year for 5 years. That's 2 trillion altogether over 5 years, which is quite moderate. And the only thing that Christine Lagarde would have to do is to announce that the ECB is standing behind those bonds in the secondary markets. I mean, by saying that, they would sell immediately those bonds, EIB bonds. And then you have 500 billion to invest in a European Union-wide green energy union. So these three things could happen in one press conference, completely legal. Nothing of what I said is illegal. No new institutions. Go. So the big question is, why are they not doing it? And I have an answer to that. I have an answer to that.
Yeah, but we must...
But you will allow me to be political now in giving you the answer, because the answer is political, it's not technical.
It is a political answer, no question.
It's a political answer.
It is.
You will allow me to give... I mean, some may say that what I'm doing now is speculation, but it could be. It's a speculative political view, but I strongly believe in what I'm going to say to you. I could be wrong. Okay, here we go. If you look at the architecture of the Eurozone, it is an oligarch's dream. Because what do very rich oligarchs, industrialists want? They want a state. They want a state because the state provides them with security, with the police, with a central bank that prints money and gives it to their banker if their banker is going bankrupt. The oligarch wants all that. What the oligarch does not want is a government with the power to put its hand in his pocket and take money out to give it to the poor. Now, every capitalist country has the central bank that provides liquidity to bankers and to oligarchs, and a government with a capacity to transfer wealth. The United States can do it. The American president, or at least the Congress together with the president, can do it if they want to, right? They did it with Roosevelt once upon a time. In the European Union, the European Monetary Union, no government can do it. I mean, even if you take the most left-wing, progressive, whatever, and you put them in government in Berlin, forget Madrid, Berlin, they couldn't do it because they don't have the capacity. They don't have a central bank anymore. Not even the Germans have a central bank. I mean, the Germans can do a little bit more than the Spaniards can do, but not much, because you don't really have governments in control of either their fiscal or their monetary policy. So the European oligarchy is extremely happy with the system we have. And why? Because they have a central bank that produces trillions, right? Huge liquidity all over Europe, okay? They provide them with a single market. They provide them with security, with a legal framework. They have everything they need. And there is no government, either a European government or a national government, that can take money away from them and give it to the poor. Why would they want to change that? Everything I suggested in the conversation we had moves in the opposite direction. Suddenly, the European Union Council uses the ECB bonds in order to create, to Europeanize parts of the debt. It has a capacity to create a Green New Deal, to invest 500 billion. So suddenly, the state can redistribute wealth. It can give money to people's bank accounts, right? They don't want to touch this amazing construct that they have, which is giving them everything and denies every government. It doesn't matter whether it's a right-wing government. They just don't want any elected representative of the people to have any power over them.
Mm-hmm. So why to change that, as you put it?
They will keep fighting.
Well, the question I probably should ask is, it looks like the narrative frame has changed in the direction that you were saying 10 years ago, 4 years ago. I mean, but the things haven't really changed at all. Is that what you are implying?
Yes. The propaganda has changed, the reality has not.
Okay.
The propaganda has really moved on. Now they talk about common debt, the recovery fund,
but, the tone has changed. We must...
Yeah, absolutely. They've learned a lesson when it comes to propaganda.
Right.
The propaganda is much better. But remember, back in 2010, 2011, 2012, it was a catastrophe. Every Eurogroup meeting ended up in disaster. And then there was another disaster. So they were losing the propaganda war, and they were depleting the economic dynamism of the European Union. Now they continue to deplete the dynamism, the economic dynamism, but the propaganda is very good. Even Piketty or people like, various friends of mine have said, the recovery fund is a great move forward. It is not. And we can discuss it.
Buenas tardes a todos y buenas tardes, señor Varoufakis. Primer punto que quería decirle, y es que llevo siguiéndole muchísimo tiempo y coincidiendo bastante con usted en muchos de sus análisis, ¿no? Sobre todo en la crítica a cómo las instituciones europeas enfocaron la crisis del 2008, que no es solo un problema de too little, too late, sino fundamentally wrong, ¿no? Yo creo que se equivocaron completamente en la orientación y la manera de enfocar esa crisis, ¿no? El punto 2 es que aquí seguramente usted y yo divergemos. Yo soy una pequeña reformista, no soy ninguna revolucionaria y creo que en política es mejor buscar los caminos transitables para mejorar ni que sea un poquito las cosas, ¿no? Que quedarse teniendo toda la razón sin poder incidir en nada, ¿no? Y yo aquí sí creo, seguramente que usted y yo tendríamos algunas discrepancias, pero para otro momento, ¿no? Pero sí es en ese sentido, y ese es mi tercer punto, que yo creo que esta crisis de ahora del COVID-19 es una crisis de naturaleza muy distinta a la del 2008, es una crisis de oferta y, por tanto, después de demanda, no se origina en el sistema financiero y creo que la respuesta ahí básicamente es de política fiscal, ¿no? No creo que el Banco Central Europeo tenga que ser el único hacedor, ¿no? De la solución a esta crisis. No creo que sería bueno ni en términos democráticos y creo, por tanto, que la respuesta fiscal que está encontrando Europa, que podríamos pedir que fuera más agresiva, ¿no? Por ejemplo, a mí lo que está haciendo Estados Unidos de darle directamente a los ciudadanos también me parecería algo a considerar, pero creo que el camino de recursos propios, federalización de la deuda y el Next Generation Europe son caminos que están bien enfocados, ¿no? Y por tanto, y este es mi último punto en el poco tiempo que tenemos, la demanda de una quita de deuda pública por parte del Banco Central Europeo no sé si sería lo más efectivo ni lo más conveniente, ¿no? En términos, más allá de los términos jurídicos, que no son los que más me interesan, ¿no? Pero es que en términos económicos, por la manera que funciona, que es que el 80% de esto revierte en los estados y luego acaba revirtiendo en el tesoro de cada uno de los estados, pues creo que tampoco le significaría una diferencia muy grande a ninguno de los estados miembros. Sí se le podría significar una quita del sector privado, pero eso ya es otro tema y seguramente políticamente digamos, la señal que se lanza, que puede ser incluso que tengan que estar un tiempo siendo contractivos en gasto, creo que ahora sería políticamente y socialmente nefasto, ¿no? Y por tanto yo políticamente podría las energías en pedir otro tipo de cosas, ¿no? Sobre todo que el paquete de inversión sea un paquete que llegue, que se hagan las reformas de verdad y que acabe revirtiendo, por ejemplo, en temas como el empleo y el capital humano, que no está claro que reviertan ahí. Yo ahí sí que sería muy insistente y dedicaría mis energías económicas y políticas a hacer que esto pase.
Allow me to tell you why I'm aghast about the recovery fund, why I think the recovery fund is a disaster. Because on the one hand, it really moves in the right direction when it comes to common debt. For the first time, we've agreed to have common debt, which is essential. Without a common debt, you cannot support the common carriage.
That was a step forward.
Yeah. If it was only that. But when you look at it in the context of what the fund and the way the money is being distributed, it's okay. I wish that step had not taken place at all. Because it is perfectly possible to make a step forward and 10 steps backward. And this is what they've done. And let me explain why I'm so aghast about the recovery fund. Now, take the United Kingdom, Britain, that is now out of the EU. It is a fiscal union between the south of England, the northeast, the northwest, Scotland, Wales. They are very different economies. Okay. Now, imagine if the United Kingdom was run as the Eurozone or the European Union is. The beauty of the proper political union, fiscal union, like the UK or the US, is that there are automatic systems in place. So when COVID-19 hit Britain, like it hit Spain, right? Some regions suffer more than others, like everywhere. Unemployment went up in some areas, not so much in other areas. But automatically, without any politician sitting around the table to make decisions and to negotiate, money went, resources went from the richer areas from the areas hit less by COVID-19 to the poorer areas without any discussion, right? Because when unemployment goes up in Yorkshire more than in Surrey, taxes from Surrey are spent on unemployment benefits or furlough wages in Yorkshire without any negotiation. Imagine if in Britain they didn't have this system and they had a recovery fund. And they had to sit around the table, representatives from South England, from Northeast England, from Northwest England. And they had to agree amongst themselves before they even knew the impact of the economic pandemic on different regions, how much money would go from the south of England to the north of England. It would
Nothing.
be a poison discussion.
Yeah.
They would kill each other. The union would be destroyed.
Will be too little,
So
too
we are
late,
creating
always.
common debt.
Yeah.
We are creating common debt, and our representatives are sitting around the table, distributing that money amongst themselves, right? Without knowing how much money will actually be needed in the end, trying to preempt that. And then, of course, they start accusing each other. So the Southerners are accusing the Northerners of tax havens. The Northerners are accusing the Southerners of corruption. The Easterners want more coal. The Westerners want more, renewables, whatever. It's a recipe for disintegration. So the common debt is a step in the right direction. But what we're doing with that common debt, firstly, as you say, look, the fiscal transfers we're talking about constitute 0.5% of GDP. 0.5% when we have an output gap in Spain of 8%. 0.5%, 8%, big difference. So there is this, the size, but it's also the architecture, the structure, the fact that all this money has to be a result of negotiation. And if you think about it, the fact that we have national governments intervening. So in a sense, money that is going to be taken out of the poorer Dutch people and the poorer German people. Why the poorer Dutch and German people? Because the rich Dutch people and the German people have, accounts in tax havens, in Luxembourg and the Cayman Islands, so they don't pay tax anyway. It's the poor Dutchmen and women. It's the poor Germans that pay. And who gets the money in Spain and in Greece? The oligarchs. So you have the poor Northerners funding the oligarchic Southerners. That is not a good recipe for European unity.
What do you expect to happen next, Professor?
Oh, God knows. Look, if you look at the last 10 years, did anyone expect this Euro crisis to continue for 10 years without any...
That was the problem with the pandemic. The pandemic arrived when we still were trying to heal the recession.
Indeed. So effectively, it's the same crisis, only made worse.
Yeah, I do agree, right.
So look, Europe is very rich, so we can keep wasting our wealth for years. And because this is what we're doing. For the last 10, 11 years, we've been wasting Europe's resources, human resources, investments. We're falling behind. We're now behind the Chinese and the Americans on everything. Artificial intelligence, renewable energy. I mean, the Germans are still building lignite power stations in the year 2021. This is, you go to Germany, your phone doesn't even have a signal.
Too little,
we're
too late,
really
again.
Falling behind.
Europe is slow.
We're falling behind. And, the things that we are good at are now becoming obsolete. Yep. And the things that are going to be the wealth-creating industries of the future are in China and in the United States and in India. They're not here. They're not in Europe. So we are wasting. There is a lot of fat to burn, right? Yep. But we are wasting it. That is my concern. So my concern is not that there will be tomorrow morning some kind of break.
Right.
I don't believe there's going to be another Brexit, for instance, anytime soon. Yep. But the European Union is becoming increasingly relevant.
Most forecasts for the coming year and 2022 show a healthy rebound of the economy throughout the European Union. The European Commission predicts a 3.7 increase of GDP in 2021 and 3.9 in 2022. However, this will by no means mean a return to a pre-COVID world anytime soon, as there are caveats to such a predicted V-shaped recovery. Some of the assumptions made, for example, that the COVID-19 infection rates will come under control soon and that the restrictions will ease, or that domestic demand will drive the recovery and that households will spend money saved during the lockdown, or that most businesses will survive more or less unscathed, are, in my view, highly uncertain. What we see is that the COVID-19 cases are on the rise in many EU countries. New and more contagious variants are spreading. Vaccination campaigns are nowhere near the numbers needed to allow for lockdown measures to be lifted entirely. It's true that fiscal programs, both by the governments and the European Union, have been very successful in supporting businesses and workers through the very sudden shock to demand and supply about 1 year ago. But we're also observing that the pressures on public finances are increasing and that there may be a delayed shock to businesses should governments be unable to support the economy in the future. And then, even if the economy as a whole is predicted to grow, it is by no means guaranteed that everyone in society will benefit from this. The COVID-19 crisis has showcased and amplified severe inequalities around the world, including in Europe. Young workers, women, migrant workers, as well as those that are not in formal employment relationships, such as outsourced workers or dependent contractors in the platforms economy, are the ones most affected. And without proper interventions, they will suffer the most in the long term. And then we should not forget that these categories of workers are increasingly accounting for a larger share of the workforce. Their propensity to consume will be affected, and they are less likely to contribute to an increase in consumption and growth. The crisis is also accelerating structural changes, many of which already started before the crisis, and we know that some sectors will recover while others will not. The seventh ILO monitor on COVID-19 and the world of work shows a further loss of hours worked in Europe of about 7% if the vaccination campaigns remain sluggish. So, what is the way forward? Well, I think that the only way forward has got to be on a continued effort at both the national and the European level to support all workers and enterprises, regardless of the size of enterprises, regardless of the employment relationship of the workers throughout the recovery. We need strong investments in social protection. We need strong investments in employment programs that will support all, including the most vulnerable workers in the society. And we need to have a program to green the economy on the way forward. And another key of success, of course, lies on the social dialogue and on the active engagement of social partners at both the national and the European level in the design and in the implementation of the COVID-19 related policies. I think that building forward better together requires a human-centered but also a progressive agenda that has got to be unprecedented in size and scope. We have to be innovative.
Well, where does one start? But let me say that the pandemic has reminded us of things that we conveniently forgotten. Both those of us on the left and those of us on the right made a very big mistake in dismissing the power of the state. Because of globalization, we imagine that the state now is obsolete, markets are everything. And that was a common fallacy, both of the right and the left.
Yep.
Okay. Now we see that the nation state is much more powerful than we imagined. They can actually shut us into our houses, for months.
Yep.
So that's one very big lesson. We have underestimated the importance of the state and state power. The question is, what do we do with the state power? How do we use it? Not whether the state has the power. The second myth that has been exploded is about money creation. That, the neoliberals used to attack me for, he's discovered the money tree again. When I was talking about clever ways of restructuring debt so as not to have huge levels of austerity that deplete the capacity of the economy to grow and therefore repay the debts. The socialists, they always discover the money tree. Well, now they've discovered the money tree because they are printing money as if there's no tomorrow. Okay? I mean, nobody disputes the money tree now.
Not at all. All
the very same people who were against spending €1 in a hospital, now they say take trillions and throw them at the economy.
Right.
The state takes over everything.
Yeah.
So, these are important lessons that we learned during the pandemic. The importance of public goods, a public health system, our public health system that we allowed for years now to shrivel and die or to be seriously depleted. Now we are reminded by the pandemic what a good investment they are, because private health cannot really help us under circumstances of a pandemic. It is only mass testing, mass vaccinations, having a system that can actually support people who fall down. Because that the difference between countries that did well during the pandemic and countries that did badly during the pandemic is effectively the capacity of public systems to support individuals, to support those who have to isolate. That this is the difference between Sweden and Greece. People in Sweden who had to isolate, they isolated, and they didn't starve. Here in Greece, people who isolated starved. They had no money. Right. Well, had very little money. So, these public support systems proved, and I think they proved themselves invaluable, not only to left-wingers, but also to people from the conservative side of politics. So these are all important lessons. And I think that we will be judged by the future generations by our capacity to learn those lessons and to turn them into policies and institutional interventions that strengthen society's capacity to reproduce itself and to defend itself.
We have two more laps in our talk. One is on the political consequences of economical decisions and situations. And we have seen in Spain, and we were joking about how Greece many times precedes Spain in political events, right? So now we have the far right that you guys had 10 years ago, and growing, now skyrocketing. And probably inequality is the main cause. But you have experienced that in your own country, and you know about it. And will you please elaborate? I mean, tell us, what's your point on far right and inequality? Because what we find in Barcelona last Sunday, it was voting. We vote, and the paradox, or maybe it's not a paradox for you, is that the far right Vox, V-O-X, made very well in very poor neighborhoods and very rich neighborhoods. And as a result, they got a wonderful result. What do you think? I mean, what have you learned from inequality, economical decisions, and far right?
You reminded me now that in one of my conversations with Wolfgang Schäuble when we were negotiating,
right.
I said to him, Wolfgang, I know you don't like my government because we're leftists, but I have to tell you something, and that I would like you to take this very seriously. We are Democrats. You don't like us. We don't like you very much. The feeling is mutual, but, we are Democrats and we're Europeanists. If you crush us and the hope we represent to those who voted us, the next people you're going to have to deal with are fascists, and they will undermine you even in your own country, in Germany, because they have strong roots in your country as well. The experiences of Spain and Greece are very similar And they've been similar for a very long time. Let me remind you that when in 1936 you were having your civil war, in the August of 1936, we had a fascist party, a fascist dictatorship, 4th of August 1936, that was installed in Greece. Right. So we are moving in parallel. You know, you had your civil war in the 1930s, we had our civil war in the 1940s. We both entered the European Union on a wave of optimism with the Social Democrats, with Felipe, González, you, and André, Papandreou, us.
I remember.
And they were friends.
Yeah.
Okay. Together we changed the European Union in the sense that we created transfers through the Mediterranean programs for funding. So the two countries are much closer together than, let's say, Greece and Italy are, or Spain and Italy, for some reason. I mean, let's not get into too much detail on this. But you know what you explained, what you described, you know, how Vox gathered a lot of support in Catalonia, both amongst the very rich and the very poor. Well, this is exactly what happened with the fascists in the 1930s, both in Spain and in Greece. And you know, it's not so much inequality as such that brings it on; it's hopelessness. It's a feeling of a population that feels humiliated when the progressives lose it, either because they give up, like they did here in 2015 when Tsipras surrendered to the Troika, or they're defeated, right? When the left stops being a credible source of a program of hope, and you have humiliation, and you've got, the most important thing is not so much poverty, it's a reduction in living standards. When working class and petty bourgeois shop owners, let's say, see that their children are going to have a worse life than they did, this, you know, it's a dynamic, it's not a static problem. When things are looking as if they're getting worse, and it's wholesale, and there is humiliation involved as well. When people feel that they are refugees in their own country.
Yeah, I was asking you about that, because we have the same problem. We have immigrants.
That is the moment. That is the moment when the fascists, you know, dominate.
Yeah, but coming back to the parallelism between Greece and Spain, we have tourism as it's about 18% of our GNP. I mean, it's crazy. Greece, probably something like that.
Even more.
Two figures. So we have huge problems with immigration, controlling immigration coming from Africa. You guys have Asia coming up. And, well, now immigration is global. So we have the same, I mean, we are gates for the European Union, gates of the desperate people of the world going through our countries. We have tourism, same problem. I mean, beaten badly by pandemia. And what do you, I mean, do you think the European Union has to give us some kind of better hand? I mean, do we deserve?
I think that whenever I hear the words European Union, I remember what Mahatma Gandhi said about Western civilization. He said it would be a good idea. So I think a European Union would be a good idea.
It's fun. Yeah.
We don't have a European Union. We have a European disunion. Now, you know, Schengen is gone. We have borders. You know, refugees come to Lesbos, and it is European Union policy that they are kept on Lesbos. They are not even allowed to go to the rest of Greece. Why should the poor, you know, refugees be stuck on an island? And why should the inhabitants of the island be, you know, see their island turn into a prison camp?
It is.
You know, it was, I remember one of the great criticisms of the Soviet Union was internal borders. Well, we have internal borders. We have internal borders within Greece, within Spain. I'm not sure you have them, but maybe they will.
We have islands.
I don't know.
Yeah, Canary Island. And,
Canary Islands, very good.
Ceuta, Melilla in the North Africa. And
that's right.
Same situation.
So you have internal borders as well.
Same problem.
And you know, the Austrians say we don't.
but
the Austrians say we don't want any refugees here.
Right.
Hang on a second. I mean, we're supposed to be a union. What do you mean you don't want any?
Creo que para medir mejor el éxito político y social hay algunas cosas que pueden ser también una alternativa, una solución. Por ejemplo, estamos acostumbrados a establecer y exigir impuestos sobre la creación de riqueza y sobre el empleo. Creo que un cambio muy importante sería empezar a gravar la destrucción de capital ecológico de una manera más importante y a lo mejor reducir los impuestos que pagan los trabajadores o que se paga por la creación de empleo y establecer un gravamen más importante para la destrucción de capital ecológico. Si el capital ecológico, el patrimonio medioambiental de Europa y del mundo es un elemento de la prosperidad, sería muy lógico gravar la destrucción de capital ecológico en lugar de exigir impuestos solo sobre la creación de riqueza y la creación de valor.
The book should explain itself. I will explain why I wrote it. You know, I'm a left-winger. I consider myself to be a socialist. Weird socialist, but socialist nevertheless, right? But the problem is, you know, with socialists, speaking for myself, I never had a satisfactory answer to the question, okay, mate, you don't like capitalism. What would socialism look like? Because I do not want to use the Soviet Union as an example. I do not want to use social democracy as an example. So this was, you know, I mean, Karl Marx never answered the question. He escaped the question by saying, "Oh, it's for the workers to create it." Yeah, but that's a cop-out, right? That's you know, that's quite cowardly. I do believe that we have, especially given the fact that many socialist experiments ended up as dystopias, as gulags, we have a moral duty to answer the question. So I sat down, I was going to, but you know, writing down a description of a utopia, a socialist utopia, was also boring. I didn't want to do it, primarily because I disagree with myself on a number of things. So this is why I decided to write it as a novel, where I have different characters, so they can disagree with one another. Because
you allow
way,
me to say you sound to me more like Costas, or maybe I'm just no.
I am closer to Iris.
Okay.
I feel closer to Iris.
More idealistic.
By the way, let me give you some news. Costa is a real person.
Okay.
Iris and Eve are not a real person. Costa exists. He's a friend of mine.
Okay.
Of course, you know, I have magnified his role, but there is a Costa who lives in San Francisco, and he's an amazing technologist. He works on neural networks and implants and stuff. So this person really exists.
Yeah.
But of course, I have stretched it.
You could say something in the book. Sorry, interrupt you. You say many things about technology, technological platforms, how to tax them, how to make them work for everybody, not just for an elite, extractive elite of billionaires. And I would like you to make a point on that too, because it's really hot now in our present life.
Okay, so the question is, how can we have a democratic society with markets, but not capitalism? You see, most people make the mistake of thinking that capitalism is the markets. No. Capitalism is defined by two markets that don't operate like markets. One is the labor market, and the labor market is nothing like any other market, because the moment you get employed, you exit the market. You enter a kind of mini Soviet Union when you go into Google to work. Right. You're not in the market. You are inside a hierarchy.
Right.
And the money markets that are not markets, really. I mean, you go to Goldman Sachs, you are in a science fiction world.
Right.
Most of the capital in there is fictitious anyway. It doesn't exist. It's, thin air, really. So can we have a democratic society without labor markets and without financial markets? So the book is I try to explain how you can have corporations that borrow many of the elements of the Catalan anarcho-syndicalist.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that quote.
You
go back to the Beginning of the century, right?
1920s, 1930s.
Anarcho-syndically, CNT and so on.
But using modern technologies and applications and apps and so on in order to make it work. So the idea here is that corporations work freely, openly. They have nothing to do with the state. They are private, but you have one employee, one share, one vote. And I explained how that would work and what effect that would have generally on competition in the marketplace. Money is effectively transferred onto the ledger of the central bank. Everybody has a free digital bank account. So suddenly you cut out the private banks. You don't need them. And if you don't have shares that can be bought and sold, because every worker has a share, then suddenly you have no share market. And you know how finance could be sophisticated, technological, international. I have a common accounting unit that is managed by something like the IMF. I call it the International Monetary Project, IMP. Differentiated. Yeah. I try to answer the question, what about land ownership? How can you move away from private ownership of the land while at the same time not have communes, to have a way in which land can be used, managed efficiently and liberally, in a liberal way, without the state telling you what to do and who lives there, but without private ownership. These were all very difficult questions, and I struggle a lot to come up, with answers. And I try to blend them in this, political science fiction, where I have characters disagreeing with one another, because it's important. I'm not really settled, and you saw from the end of the book, which we do not want to reveal to our audience. Yeah. In the end, I always leave the central question: how far are we prepared to go in order to bring about a better society? Because a lot of crimes against humanity have been perpetrated by those who have traded on the public good. No dictator, every dictator has claimed to be working to create a utopia. Okay. So, I'm very, very skeptical of utopias, and I'm very skeptical even of my own utopia. So I was struggling to write a book which has this self-doubt in it and asks these pertinent questions and doesn't necessarily answer them, but provides the reader an opportunity to answer them. So,
last question. New technology, as you say in the book, or Costas maybe more, makes it possible, right? Make possible another system, because we have now tools that we didn't have. But the question goes, okay, so if that utopia can happen, why would have the dystopia of Google concentrating money, billions, in the hands of very few, a handful of extractive elite billionaires? Why and what should be done? Taxing will be...
That's how history works, isn't it? Think about it. The way we escaped feudalism and the tyranny of the Middle Ages, the way we had Enlightenment and then modernity, was through the concentration. Two things happened. One is technology, right? Just like in my book, technology has always been a driving force of history.
It was, since Marx.
From the beginning, the discovery of how to melt iron ore and turn it into steam. That really sped up history magnificently. We went to the Iron Age. In the Iron Age, we started counting time in terms of decades, not centuries or millennia. So technology is a driving force. Technology creates power. Power is usually held by a few, the oligarchs, who use it for their own purposes. That creates conflicts. And the combination of these social conflicts and the technological innovations drive history. So Google was essential in the same way that Henry Ford and Thomas Edison were crucial for moving away from the 19th century.
The big platforms.
And having the platform companies. Now, we needed Google in order to be able to concentrate information that is necessary in order to be able to have the kind of market society, democratic market society that I am envisaging. But I was giving a talk in Google. I was invited. It was great fun. I gave a talk at the Google campus in California.
Good point.
And I said,
good point.
And I said to them,
Yeah.
you guys, you've done in humanity a major service.
Yeah.
You created a capacity to concentrate information in a way that we never had it before. You created effectively a human right, because now search is a human right. If you deny me the right to go into the Google search engine and search for stuff, you're denying me a human right. But then I added to them, the problem, however, is when you create a human right, you can no longer be allowed to monopolize it. So now we have to take it away from you guys.
Good point. I don't know if they will ask to come back next year. We'll see.
So that is the answer. This is how history progresses.
Right.
But the question for Democrats is, how do you take the capacities that we developed through this process, which is an oligarchic process, and democratize them?
Okay. So let me ask you.
That's what I try to answer in the book.
Yeah, we will. Well, I did already. So we invite our readers to follow me on this, reading and follow you. And I just got few short personal questions to see if they are, it will take 5 minutes, don't worry.
Let's go.
The first one is on, aging, maturing, growing old. Maturing or growing old, how do you feel? How do you feel experience makes your life richer? And how do you cope with time, with the time and space, in fact? How do you feel about being 1 year old every year?
Look, this year I'm 60, so that's a big milestone, right? I mean, next month.
Hey, lucky you.
For me, one thing really matters, and that is that I'm happier now than I have ever been.
Great.
Yeah, so I'm really privileged, and that is in the end all that matters. Would I want to go 10 years back? And under no circumstances. 20 years back, no. I think of myself when I was in my 20s with a lot of warmth, but no nostalgia whatsoever. I really do not want to go back to that period of my life in the 1980s. Under no circumstances.
Lucky you.
I'm a bit worried that my right shoulder hurts a lot more than it used to. Those ailments. But
you still got the motorbike. You still have the motorbike.
The same one.
Okay, good.
The same one.
Great.
It's out there.
Great. Lucky you. Lucky you.
Yeah.
You don't move to the bikes here. We are moving.
Let's go.
We are changing to the bike.
Let's go.
Cycling. Well, anyway.
Oh, you mean bicycle?
Yeah.
No, I need my.
Not the same feeling.
Not the same feeling.
We consider.
I used to be a cyclist when I was young, but
the bike feels better. I mean,
I've
the
been
motorbike.
Cycling for many decades.
Great. So you were born. Just recall us. You have double nationality, right? Double citizenship.
Yeah, Greek and Australian.
Okay, and you are now in the Greek Parliament.
That's correct.
Tell us a little bit, just a short sentence about being there, being part of everyday political life in Greece.
Oh, it's extremely gratifying because this time, unlike 2015, I'm part of a party that I helped create, Meta 25.
Yeah.
Which means there are no backstabbings. In 2015, I was part of a larger party with many sections and factions
I
and
remember.
so on.
Even
We
me.
create now our party, Meta 25, is a party created by people who do not like parties.
Okay, perfect.
We do not like politics, we do not like parties, but we cannot allow the same old parties to continue ruling.
All right.
So it's a gang of people who do not want to be elected, who do not want to be ministers, who do not want to be members of parliament, who are doing it as a chore, as a duty. And, you know, if the key to being happy and genuine as a politician is not to be a politician. So if tomorrow, you know, we are not in parliament, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We're not going to be upset. This is not, you know, something that we've been wanting to do.
Right.
It's like taking the rubbish out at night.
Yep.
You take the rubbish out at night not because you enjoy it,
Right.
but somebody has to take it out at night.
Okay. Someone has got to do it, right? And what else we ask? Oh, you got 3 kids, right?
Between my wife and I've got one biological child of my own.
Congratulations.
My wife has 2. Together we have 3.
Great. Everybody's
dog.
okay with even the pandemic? Everybody's healthy and happy?
Everybody's healthy and happy. My daughter is in Australia. This is where she's growing up.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
And last 2 things were, one was, I asked you about your creed, you told me once that you were a humanist believer, something like that. It still works.
That has not.
Great.
That has not changed.
And we always ask people about their politics, but we had 1 hour talk on that. So it's more than enough. I really appreciate your help and your talent. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Yanis.
Hola. Have a good night or day.
To you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.